There's a staircase inside Graceland that millions of visitors have looked up at and never been allowed to climb. It sits just past the living room, roped off, guarded, silent. For almost 50 years, that staircase has led to the one part of the mansion the public has never seen, the private upstairs where Elvis Presley slept, worked, and eventually died. Now, for the first time in the estate's history, the person guiding that story is not a historian or a tour manager. It's his granddaughter, Riley Keough, an actress, a mother, and, since 2023, the sole owner of Graceland itself. Through a memoir she helped finish, a primetime interview with Oprah Winfrey, and a handful of candid television appearances, Keough has started talking about what that upstairs actually means to her family. This is her story, and the story of the house that raised 3 generations of Presleys. Graceland wasn't built to be a monument. It began in 1939 as a comfortable 10-room limestone home on the edge of Memphis, built for a local businessman and his family. It had columns, a wide porch, and open fields around it, a quiet country property, nothing like the cultural landmark it would become. When Elvis Presley bought it in 1957, he was 22 years old and already one of the most famous entertainers alive, but he wasn't looking for a palace. He was looking for a place where photographers couldn't reach him. Graceland's appeal was privacy, not size. That privacy didn't last, but Elvis's imprint on the house did. Over the following 2 decades, he expanded and reshaped it into something that reflected exactly who he was: playful, spiritual, restless, and deeply attached to the people he loved. The Jungle Room, with its green shag carpet and heavy carved furniture, became both a hangout space and, later, an informal recording studio. The meditation garden behind the house, added in the 1960s, became a place of quiet reflection long before it became his final resting place alongside his parents, grandmother, and eventually his daughter, Lisa Marie. When Graceland opened to the public in 1982, it introduced the world to Elvis's world: the gold records, the jumpsuits, the cars, the studios. But one part of the house was left out of every tour. Then and now, everything above the ground floor. The decision to seal the second floor wasn't a marketing choice. It was made by Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, in the immediate aftermath of his son's death on August 16, 1977. Vernon wanted the space where Elvis had lived his final years left exactly as it was, not preserved for eventual display, but protected from being turned into a spectacle. That decision has held for every generation of the family since, through Lisa Marie Presley's ownership, and now through Riley Keough's. For years, the silence around the upstairs did what silence always does. It invited speculation. Fans wondered whether the rooms held some kind of secret. Tabloids speculated about hidden recordings, hidden relationships, even, in the more outlandish corners of pop culture, a hidden escape route. But according to what Keough has actually said in her recent public appearances, the truth of the upstairs is far less sensational and far more human. It isn't a vault of secrets. It's a bedroom that hasn't been touched in almost 50 years, because touching it never felt like the family's decision to make. Riley Keough didn't grow up visiting Graceland as a tourist. She grew up sleeping there. In interviews tied to the release of her mother's posthumous memoir, From Here to the Great Unknown, Keough has described a childhood in which the upstairs wasn't a museum exhibit, but simply her family's private space, the part of the house where she, her mother, and her brother Benjamin would stay when they visited Memphis. She has recalled, with a mix of nostalgia and dark comedy, what it was like to be a child sharing a house with a working tourist attraction. On a 2024 appearance on Late Night with Seth Meyers, Keough described how she, her mother, and her brother would sometimes get caught upstairs after the day's Graceland tours had already begun. Because Elvis's bedroom and Lisa Marie's own former bedroom were never part of the public route, anyone still up there when the doors opened had no way to leave without walking straight through a crowd of visitors. So they simply waited it out, sometimes for hours, until the last tour group left in the late afternoon. It's a small, almost funny detail, but it says something important. For the Presley family, the upstairs was never a sealed vault they visited occasionally. It was where they actually lived when they were home. In the same memoir, Keough describes a more emotional side of that same space. She has written that the upstairs still feels essentially untouched, arranged the way Elvis left it, and that being there gives the family a tangible sense of his presence, decades after his death. She has described nights spent with her mother in what had been Elvis's own bedroom, not out of superstition, but because Lisa Marie found comfort there. Being close to that room, she has said, was one of the ways her mother stayed close to her father even after losing him at just 9 years old. What exactly remains upstairs has never been fully catalogued for the public, and Riley Keough has been careful not to turn it into a display case. But the picture that emerges from her interviews is consistent. The rooms are largely as they were in the summer of 1977. Elvis's bedroom, his private office and study, where he kept books, notes, and personal items that were never meant for an audience. Lisa Marie's own childhood bedroom, kept separately preserved as a piece of her history as much as his. This is not a house frozen for effect. It's a house frozen because no one in the family has ever wanted to be the one who changed it. Vernon Presley set that precedent in 1977, and every steward of Graceland since. Priscilla Presley during the years she oversaw the estate transition into a public attraction, Lisa Marie during her decades as owner, and now Riley Keough, has chosen to continue it rather than reverse it. Keough's most detailed and emotional public accounting of what the upstairs means came through her mother's own words. Lisa Marie had recorded hours of audio memories for her memoir before her sudden death in January 2023, and it fell to Riley to listen to those tapes and shape them into a finished book. In her 2024 interview with Oprah Winfrey, part of a primetime special filmed partly at Graceland itself, Keough described sitting with those recordings and hearing her mother talk, often for the first time in detail, about growing up in that house. Lisa Marie's memories ranged from light-hearted, racing golf carts across the Graceland lawns with her father, to devastating, including her recollection of the morning Elvis died, and the sense she had, even as a 9-year-old saying good night to him the night before, that something wasn't right. Keough has said that finishing her mother's memoir and revisiting those upstairs spaces in the process changed the way she understood her family's history. It wasn't about uncovering secrets. It was about finally hearing, in her mother's own recorded voice, what those rooms had actually meant to her. Riley Keough didn't become the owner of Graceland by plan. When Lisa Marie Presley died unexpectedly in January 2023 at the age of 54, ownership of the estate passed to her surviving children, Riley and her 2 half-sisters, twins born to Lisa Marie's marriage with musician Michael Lockwood. Riley's brother, Benjamin Keough, had died by suicide in 2020, a loss Riley has spoken about publicly as one of the most defining griefs of her life, and one her mother never fully recovered from. The transition of ownership was not simple. Priscilla Presley, Lisa Marie's mother, publicly challenged the validity of a 2016 amendment to the family trust that had named Riley as trustee, raising questions in court filings about the document's authenticity. The dispute drew significant media attention in 2023, given both the emotional stakes and the estate's considerable value. Rather than proceeding through a prolonged court battle, the two sides reached a private settlement later that year, and Riley Keough took her place as the estate's controlling owner and its public face. That role has put Keough in an unusual position. She's an actress with an established career of her own, known for projects including Daisy Jones and The Six and Under the Bridge, who has also become, almost overnight, the person responsible for one of the most visited private homes in the United States, trailing only the White House in annual foot traffic. She now oversees decisions about preservation, licensing, exhibits, and, most sensitively, what does and doesn't get shared from the family's private history. For most of Graceland's history as a public attraction, the family's approach to the upstairs was to say almost nothing about it at all. Lisa Marie rarely discussed it in detail publicly. Even close friends of the Presley family have generally treated the subject with a kind of protective silence, treating the second floor less as a mystery to be solved than as a private grief that belonged to the family alone. Riley Keough's recent openness marks a real shift, though it's a careful one. She has not opened the rooms to cameras. She has not released photographs or floor plans. What she has done is talk, in her own words, about what those spaces meant to her mother and to her, largely through the vehicle of her mother's memoir, and through a small number of televised interviews tied to its release. Part of the reason seems to be timing. Finishing From Here to the Great Unknown forced Keough to spend months immersed in her mother's memories, many of them tied directly to the rooms upstairs at Graceland. Grief is a way of making people want to talk rather than stay silent, and Keough has been candid in interviews about how disorienting the past few years have been, losing her brother in 2020, then her mother in 2023, all while stepping into public ownership of one of the most scrutinized homes in American pop culture. Speaking about the upstairs, even in general terms, appears to be part of how she's processed that loss rather than a calculated reveal. Because the family has said so little for so long, the vacuum around Graceland's second floor filled with exactly the kind of stories vacuums tend to attract. For decades, a small but devoted corner of Elvis fandom has floated the idea that he faked his own death, pointing to his growing reclusiveness in the mid-1970s, his declining health, and the minor discrepancy between his legal middle name, Aaron, and the Aaron spelling used on some official records. Alleged sightings followed for years afterward. A man boarding a Memphis flight under an alias Elvis was known to use blurry photographs, second-hand accounts from people who claimed to have seen him decades after 1977. None of these claims has ever produced verifiable evidence. Elvis's death was confirmed by autopsy, his body was viewed by family members, and his funeral was public and extensively documented. The persistence of the theory says less about hidden facts and more about how uncomfortable people are with the ordinariness of his final years. A man in declining health, largely confined to the upper floor of his own house, slowly withdrawing from the world that had never let him rest. A related but separate rumor claims Graceland conceals a hidden tunnel beneath the property, supposedly built as either a privacy measure or an escape route. No official blueprint of the estate shows any such passage, though skeptics note that the publicly available blueprints also don't detail the second floor, which unquestionably exists. The tunnel story has never been substantiated by any Graceland archivist, employee, or family member, and Riley Keough has not addressed it directly. Understandably, since there's little reason to dignify an unverified rumor with a formal response. There have also been recurring, unverified claims over the decades from individuals asserting they are biological children of Elvis Presley outside of his marriage to Priscilla. Most of these claims have surfaced in tabloids rather than courts, and the handful that have reached legal proceedings have generally failed for lack of credible chain of custody